welcome to this episode of Conversation with a Chef. I'm Jo Ritty and I love sharing with you the conversations I get to have with talented and passionate chefs. It's the backstory, if you will, to the food they're putting up. I begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the lands and airwaves where this conversation took place. Land which was never ceded, land where communities came together to eat seasonally, locally and without exhausting resources. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and to any First Nations people listening today. Grace Loke is a PhD student at RMIT in Melbourne and is co-lead in a team of researchers exploring the role of our sensory perception in the way we enjoy eating. More specifically, they're looking at the reasons why astronauts report meals taste bland in space and as a result are failing to eat their normal nutritional intake. Previous research has shown that aroma plays a large role in how we perceive food, but could it also be that aroma might affect mood and willingness or openness to the enjoyment of that food? The researchers are using virtual reality to simulate the astronauts' environment, and this of course adds another layer to understanding the many factors involved in our experience of eating, and the implications could go far beyond just the astronaut situation. This is obviously a departure from chatting to a chef, but I found the idea so fascinating, I just had to know more.
Hello.
Hi Grace, it's Jo here.
Hi, Jo. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Thanks so much for agreeing to speak to me. It's such a fascinating topic, so I'm really interested to hear more.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your interest in the research.
Yeah. So maybe let's just situate your involvement in the research. What's your part in this?
So I'm a PhD candidate at RMIT University, but I'm also one of the co-lead researchers on this project.
And what, in terms of like thesis, is it what would the title be? Because I did read a couple of different titles. There's the smell perception in virtual spacecraft, a ground-based approach to sensory and chemical data. Is that what you're calling it?
Yeah, that's the actual title of it.
Yeah, and then there's a couple of other titles on the more media articles, like food aroma study help explain why meals taste bad in space. And then you wrote a really great article in The Conversation as well, which I thought was good. Astronauts don't eat enough because food tastes bland in space. We're trying to work out why, which was really, I thought that was it in a nutshell. So what led you to this quite niche study?
Well, our team at RMIT, we really wanted to understand how astronauts eat in space. Particularly, we know that from a sensory science background, which is where I come from, the environment in which we eat in affects how much we actually enjoy our food. So previous reports from astronauts, they have said that food tastes differently in space, being less flavorful and more bland in that sense. So that was something we thought was worth exploring. Because a lot of the times when astronauts go on these space missions, they're actually not meeting their energy needs, which means that they just need to eat more. And while this is manageable for shorter missions, like maybe a couple of months, when we think about space travel into, far beyond the moon, to Mars, and even beyond that, it might be really detrimental to their health if they're not meeting those energy needs.
And I guess all those factors, so this study is really about it not being purely physiological, it's also environmental, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because I was reading in the article that, initially there were some thoughts around perhaps gravity affecting where the fluid was held in the body. So instead of lower down in the body, more up around the head. So that might affect aromas and things, but that's only a small part of it. Is that right?
Yeah, so in space, there's actually so much to consider. Gravity is just one part of it. Like you said, when you're in that environment, all the fluids in your body, like your blood, for example, kind of rushes up to your head and creates a lot of pressure. And from this pressure, you get the sensation of having a blocked nose. And that's like one of the ways where you can lose your sense of flavor perception, I would say. But within this environment as well, like if you think of being in an airtight container, right? There's no circulation. It's more just recycled air, sort of like being in an airplane, just recycled air, and even the water is being recycled. So there's a lot of things that could affect their sense of taste, their sense of smell, and their flavor perception. And even in this space environment, we don't really understand how like aroma chemical particles, how they disperse in the air and how that affects how we smell them.
Yeah. So is it that they're not feeling hungry, or they feel hungry but they've just got no interest in the food?
Well, there's two parts to this really, because when astronauts first go up into space, they also experience something called space sickness. And it's, you know, what it sounds like really. They feel really nauseous and they just want to lie down. It's a really bad time. So because of that, they also lose their appetite. But when it does come to hunger, while they do feel hungry, you know, like any other person, foods just generally don't really appeal to them as much as they would compared to on Earth.
So how did you set about, what were the parameters of this research, I guess, or how did you work out how to approach this problem?
How is a big question. So we had a lot of time to think and get a lot of people from different departments within RMIT University. So we collaborated with someone from space science. She was actually, her name is Gail. She was a previous astronaut trainer. So she was the one who inspired us to see, to really tackle the problems of nutrition in space as well. And from her, we got those insights of, okay, how are astronauts actually feeling in space? Because it's such an isolating and confining type of environment, which is really what we wanted to hone into. And then we've got, you know, people from chemical engineering as well. Sorry, not chemical engineering, computer engineering, like that. Who have worked with us to create this virtual reality simulation. And this simulation basically models the International Space Station, or the ISS, to really get you feeling immersed in this space-like environment. And that's what we use to test on our study participants.
Wow. Just what do astronauts eat? Because I was talking to someone about this and they were like, don't they just have, you know, sachets of things or dried, what do they actually eat anyway?
You know what, before I started my research, that's exactly what I thought. But space food has really evolved since then. Back in, you know, the early days of space travel, everything was basically in like toothpaste tubes. You squeeze it out and you basically eat mush. And then we fast tracked into freeze-dried foods, where you would typically see in supermarkets as well, like freeze-dried berries, for example. Because having anything that's fresh, obviously we can't do that in space. You need something with a really long shelf life, something that's safe for the radioactive environment, for example. And also in space, everything needs to be small, compact, and as light as it can possibly be. But nowadays, space food has evolved in such a way that there are researchers at other universities looking at planting food in space, so planting fresh vegetables to be able to encourage astronauts to eat more fresh foods and also make them a bit happier, because there's a bit of a connection to Earth in that sense.
And what aspect does, because there's a bit later on in the article that talks about the importance of particular aromas such as vanilla and almond. Where does that come into it?
So our study looked at very basic food aromas. So like you said, we looked at vanilla, almond, and lemon. And what we found that in this space-like environment, those aromas, vanilla and almond, were perceived as more intense. Whereas when we compared it to an earthly setting where we just put people in a room with a chair and a table, they had a lower perception of that intensity, if that makes sense. So as you know, vanilla and almond are two very different flavors. But chemically, on a chemical level, they actually share a common chemical compound called benzaldehyde. Benzaldehyde is known to give off that sweet almond-like odor. But surprisingly, it's also present in vanilla. Vanilla also has, other chemical compounds like vanillin, for example, that gives it that sweet characteristic. And what we think is that those sweet characteristics from these aromas are what leads to a higher intensity perception in a space-like environment. So truly, the bottom line here is that we may smell food aromas differently in space, but it's just selective as to what kind.
And then would the idea then be to use that to put into the food to encourage them to eat more?
Yeah. One of the things that we kind of thought about while we were forming the project, and even after getting all the results from this, was, what if we put someone in a room, right? And we have them eat a meal, but in the background, we disperse the smell of vanilla, for example. How would that change how they see their food, like what they're eating in front of them? And would that even boost their appetite, for example? So that's one of the things that we really want to try out. But at the moment, we're looking at very fundamental stuff to see if there even is a difference.
That's really interesting because I feel like those kind of scents, particularly vanilla, I mean, you can buy vanilla body fragrance, can't you, from Mecca or whatever, and people see that as a delicious thing to wear. I'm not quite there, but like the idea of home baking and so on is very appealing to people, and maybe it does alter our perception of what's going on as well because it makes us feel cozy and homely and stuff. That's fascinating. Yeah.
Exactly. And what we truly want to work towards here is personalizing diet. You talk to chefs a lot, right?
I do.
So they make their own menus, and it's always got to be fun and interesting. But when we combine science and food and art, we're working towards personalizing diets driven by each person's sensory experience. So making it very unique to you, and that. And in that sense, you can, enjoy your food better, maybe even encourage better eating habits through that as well.
Yeah, and then I was reading that might have some knock-on effects of perhaps being able to use that with people on Earth who are in those isolated situations, such as people in aged care or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder how that would have helped us in, like the pandemic, for example, because we were pretty much in a situation of being very isolated and confined to our rooms at the time. So if only something like that existed back then, it would have been very interesting.
Absolutely. So how much further have you got to go on this project?
So this is just the beginning.
Wow.
In the coming weeks or a month or so, we will be recruiting for a separate project that we have started to run. So this next project is really looking at more complex flavors. So here we only use 3 very basic aromas, but later on we want to look at things that may be indicative of a cultural difference as well, because this study has shown that there is individual variation in how people smell things. For example, I don't know about you, but I hate cilantro.
I just heard someone talking about this today. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate coriander, and every time we go out to a market, for example, and I'm standing next to fresh produce, I can tell you which direction the coriander is coming from.
Wow.
So, yeah, that individual variation in people is what we're truly interested in as well. And if we look at aromas that are, let's say, native to Australia, like eucalyptus and lemon myrtle, how would that change your perception, I guess? Because some people are not familiar with these smells.
Absolutely. That's a really, gosh. There's so much complexity, isn't there, and so much to think about. And it really, as you say, we often talk about eating with the senses, but that really takes it to a whole next level.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, is there anything else you wanted to share about what you're doing?
I think just the fact that, we wouldn't have gotten here if it weren't for collaboration. And that's what we're really looking for, whether it's collaborating with space agencies, for example, or even collaborating in a gastronomical sense, like working together with chefs. Scientists can only do so much in uncovering the knowledge, but it's really the people who apply them that play a big role into this as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to be thinking about this for days. So I really appreciate.
If you have any more questions, just pop me an email.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Grace. All the best.
Cool. Thank you so much, Joe. Nice talking to you.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Conversation with a Chef. Today I was speaking with doctoral student Grace Loke from RMIT, and to read more about her study you can go to www.rmit.edu.au/news. If you'd like to hear stories about chefs, I'm on Instagram at Conversation with a Chef. You can read the chat and become a subscriber at www.conversationwithachef.com. And of course you can follow me on Apple and Spotify podcasts. I would love it if you told a friend about my chats, because that's still the best way to get the stories out there. Once again, thanks so much for listening and have a great day.